From the ground, it is invisible. This is the first, and perhaps the most crucial fact in this entire investigation. To stand there, in the heart of the Mauritanian desert, is to see nothing but an endless, monotonous sea of black pebbles, ochre sand, and low, wind-scoured hills. Your own shadow becomes the only landmark in a world bleached by a merciless sun. A person could live an entire lifetime there and die, never once comprehending the true nature of the ground upon which they stood. Because to see it, you must leave the earth. You must ascend 100, 200, even 400 kilometers into the cold, airless vacuum of space. You need the sterile glass of a viewport and the dead silence of orbit. Only from there, against the vast canvas of the Sahara, does it reveal its true face. The Rishat structure, a perfectly circular, 40-kilometer set of concentric rings carved into the planet itself. When the astronauts of Gemini 4, James McDivitt and Ed White, first laid eyes upon it in 1965, they were stunned. Their mission was to spot man-made objects, cities, smoke, the contrails of rockets. Instead, from the middle of a vast yellow-brown expanse, a gigantic geological bullseye stared back. It was so flawless, so alien to the surrounding landscape, that they used it as a primary navigational landmark. They called it the Eye of the Sahara. For centuries it was hidden from us, even as we walked across it, beside it, utterly blind to its form. We saw it only when we gained eyes in the heavens, and in the moment of its discovery, our understanding of the world fractured. Geologists, scientists, people of fact offered a rational, comprehensible, almost mundane explanation. A collapsed and eroded geological dome, the patient work of millions of years. But others saw something else entirely, something that compelled them to pull a very, very old book from the shelf. They saw a ghost, a phantom from the most ancient, most influential, and most ridiculed myth in all of Western civilization. For 2,400 years ago, the Greek philosopher Plato described a lost city, a city built of concentric rings of land and water, a city located to the west, beyond the Pillars of Hercules, a city destroyed in a single, terrible day and night of earthquakes and floods. He called this city Atlantis. Today, official science tells us it is merely erosion, a beautiful accident of time. And Plato's story is just that, a story, an allegory, a pedagogical fable. But what if the most influential and sober-minded philosopher in human history was not inventing, but remembering? How, by any means, could Plato have described with such incredible mathematical precision a structure he could not have possibly seen? A feature of our world that remained undiscovered until the dawn of the space age. What if a myth, down to its most intricate and seemingly impossible details, was found to be true? This is not a tale of lost civilizations or enchanted crystals. This is an investigation, a forensic examination of how two entirely different, utterly disconnected sets of data, an ancient mythological text and the cold empirical gaze of a modern satellite, began to tell the exact same unbelievable story. It forces us to ask the most fundamental of questions. What if everything we thought we knew was wrong? The history of this place is a history of being found, being lost, and being profoundly misunderstood. The first man to truly discover the Rishat for the world of science was not an astronaut, but one of the last great solitary explorers, the French naturalist Théodore Monod. During the 1930s, Monod was a man possessed by the Sahara. He was of a rare breed who could walk for weeks across the searing emptiness.
Welcome to my channel. If you're fascinated by hidden truths, lost civilizations, and unsolved mysteries, you're in the...
Sustained by the barest minimum of water, meticulously charting geological outcrops and cataloging rare flora. It was on one of these grueling expeditions that he stumbled into the structure. He entered it from the ground and was left deeply perplexed. From his perspective, there were no rings, no grand design. He saw only a strange, chaotic landscape, a bewildering jumble of rock formations with an inexplicable diversity. He was the first to formally propose that it might be the scar of a celestial impact, a crater from a long-dead meteorite. He searched for the evidence, for the telltale fragments of an otherworldly visitor, but found nothing. The place defied him. From the ground, the structure made no sense. It was too vast, its pattern too immense to be comprehended from within its own embrace. Monod left the Rishat with its secret intact, but he placed it on the map, a question mark designated as a geological anomaly. Decades passed. Humanity broke its terrestrial bonds and journeyed into the cosmos. The year is 1965. The mission, Gemini 4. Astronauts James McDivitt and Ed White orbit the silent Earth. Their directive is simple: photograph anything that appears unusual or significant. In their flight log, an entry appears. There, amid the endless ochre waves of the Mauritanian desert, they see it, a gigantic bullseye staring back at them. So clear, so geometrically perfect, it seemed impossible for it to be. When these images returned to Earth, they sent a shockwave through the geological community. Scientists looked at the photographs from Gemini 4 and cross-referenced them with Monod's obscure, half-forgotten maps. It was the same location. Only now, from the vantage point of orbit, could its true form finally be seen. The chaos Monod had walked through resolved into breathtaking order. And from that moment, the scientific race to explain the eye of the Sahara began in earnest. Before we delve into the fringes of possibility, we must give the official explanation its due, for it is important, and in its own way, no less impressive. If we are to find the cracks in the accepted story, we must first understand the story itself. New vigor. It was the simplest, most elegant explanation, but this time, dedicated expeditions were sent to the site. They drilled cores, they took samples, they analyzed the very bones of the structure. And the theory crumbled into desert dust. Not a single key marker of a hypervelocity impact was ever found. There was no shocked quartz, the crystalline signature of immense pressure, where the orderly lattice of the mineral is fractured in microscopic parallel lines. This is the indelible fingerprint of an asteroid strike, and its complete absence was a definitive refutation. The Earth itself had not been wounded from above. The simplest answer was erased, leaving a void where certainty once stood, and making way for a far stranger story to be told. There were none of the telltale signs. No glistening fields of tektites, the strange, melted glass forged in the unimaginable heat of an impact. No shatter cones, the unique, fan-shaped fractures in rock that serve as a cosmic fingerprint. And no trace of iridium, the celestial element that so often dusts the graves of cataclysmic collisions. The very heart of the structure defied the logic of a crater. It was not a bowl pressed into the earth by a violent, instantaneous pressure. On the contrary, its center was raised, an uplifted dome. The hypothesis of an impact from the heavens was dead on arrival. The next theory turned inward, looking for an answer not in the sky, but in the planet's molten core. Perhaps this was a volcano, a giant, failed caldera. The narrative was compelling. Magma, rising from the deep, began to swell the crust, creating a vast dome. But it lacked the final, explosive force to breach the surface. Over eons, this geological blister collapsed under its own weight, and the
This is where things get really interesting. What you're about to hear might explain why this was never meant to be discovered.
patient hand of erosion did the rest. This was closer to the truth, but here too were problems. The Rishat structure is almost entirely devoid of classic volcanic rock. The basalts and pumice one would expect to find, the sheer volumes required for such a mega volcano, were simply absent. Finally, through the 1970s and 80s, after decades of research, the geological community reached a consensus. This was neither a crater nor a volcano. It was something far more patient, far more subtle. It was what geologists call a geological dome, or a domal anticline. To understand its origin, we must travel back in time. Deep beneath the Earth, hundreds of millions of years ago, when Africa and South America were still locked together as part of the supercontinent Gondwana, a plume of molten magma began to push upward, a vast blister forming beneath the planet's skin. It never erupted. Instead, it simply lifted the immense layers of sedimentary rock above it, sandstone. This process created a colossal dome. Eventually, the center of this dome collapsed, creating what is known as breccia, a chaotic jumble of fragmented, broken rock that serves as proof of this ancient internal failure. Then, for 100 million years, came the sculptors, wind and water. Yes, water once flowed through the Sahara. Rivers, rains, and floods began to slice away at the top of this great dome, as if a colossal blade had sheared the cap from a geological onion. And here, the magic of differential erosion began its work. The different layers of rock possessed different degrees of hardness. The resilient layers of quartzite fiercely resisted the onslaught. The softer layers of shale and limestone yielded more easily. Wind and water washed away the softer stone, leaving the harder layers standing proud as concentric projecting rings. Millions of years of this slow, methodical, mindless work, and the eye of the Sahara was born. The rings we see are not walls, they are the exposed edges of this. It is an elegant, logical, and now the most widely accepted scientific theory. It explains the composition of the rock, the absence of impact markers, and the grand mechanism of its formation. At this point, most geologists close the file. The case is solved. It is simply stone. Beautiful, but lifeless stone. But it is here, on this final page of the official report, that our own investigation truly begins. Because this report, for all its geological precision, for all
Most people stop watching right here. But if you continue,
its elegant explanation, cannot account for one thing. It cannot account for Plato. Let us for a moment forget geology. Let us travel to Athens around the year 360 before the Common Era. To the mind of Plato, the most revered philosopher in the Western tradition, whose words would echo through millennia, shaping the very course of human thought. He stands at the zenith of his intellectual power. A mind that has shaped the very foundations of Western philosophy is now composing two of his most enigmatic dialogues, Timaeus and Critias. These are not minor, obscure texts. They are monumental works, and within their pages, Plato, through the character of his own great-grandfather Critias, lays before us a history. Critias is adamant. This is no myth, he insists, no mere allegory. It is a truthful telling. It is a story passed down through a remarkable lineage of memory, a story his grandfather told him, a tale first heard from the great Athenian sage Solon. And Solon, in his turn, was entrusted with it by the ancient priests of Egypt in the sacred temple of the city of Sais. The priests' words to Solon were a stark admonishment. "You Hellenes," they declared, "are ever children. There is no old opinion handed down among you by ancient tradition, nor any science which is hoary with age." They spoke of records kept within their temples, chronicles of civilizations the Greeks had long since forgotten. They spoke of a great war waged between the ancient Proto-Athenians and a mighty empire situated beyond the Pillars of Hercules. That empire had a name: Atlantis. To proceed, we must be meticulously precise. We will not lean on the crutch of cinema, of animation, or of esoteric books written in later ages. We will consult only the primary source, the text of Plato. And we will treat it not as a fable, but as an investigator would a police report, a list of clues, a file on a case gone cold for millennia. Exhibit number 1. The location. Plato states that Atlantis was situated in front of the strait which you Hellenes call the Pillars of Hercules. This is almost universally acknowledged as the Strait of Gibraltar. The Atlantean Empire itself was said to command an island larger than Libya and Asia Minor combined. But the capital city, the heart of this power, was located at a specific distance from these pillars, on the coast of the Atlantic Ocean. The geological feature, known as the Richat structure, resides in Mauritania, on the Atlantic coast, to the south and west of Gibraltar. The first correspondence is established. Exhibit number 2. The structure. This is the most critical, the most shocking point in the entire account. Plato describes the capital of Atlantis with a dispassionate, almost engineering accuracy. He states the city was built upon a mountain that was low on all sides. The central island, where the Acropolis and the royal palace stood, was encircled by a ring of water. Beyond this was a ring of land, then another ring of water, and finally one more ring of land. 3 concentric rings of earth and 2 of water, arranged symmetrically around the central island. Plato even provides the dimensions. The central island, 5 stades in diameter. The inner ring of land, 2 stades in width. The outer ring of land, 3 stades in width. It is a blueprint etched in time, a geometric signature of breathtaking specificity. Exhibit number 3. The canal to the sea. The account continues. Plato asserts that the Atlanteans carved a grand channel connecting the outer ring of water directly to the ocean. This canal was 50 stades in length, nearly 9 kilometers. It was 300 feet in width and 100 feet deep. a monumental feat of engineering that allowed seafaring vessels to sail directly into the city's heart, into purpose-built harbors carved from the inner rings of land. It paints a picture of a thriving maritime metropolis, a civilization with an absolute mastery of its environment. Exhibit number 4, the geography. Plato adds another layer of detail, a description of the surrounding landscape. He says the city was located on the southern side of the island, with a view of the sea, but was sheltered to the north by high mountains.
Wait, this is not the full story. The most important part is just beginning, and it changes everything we thought we knew.
The city itself was encircled by a vast and perfectly level plain. A southern exposure for warmth and trade, a northern barrier against winds and invaders, and a fertile plain for sustenance. Each detail adds another brushstroke to a portrait. A location beyond Gibraltar, a capital of concentric rings of land and water, a great canal connecting it to the ocean, mountains to the north, and a vast plain to the south. The dossier of evidence, as presented in the ancient text, is complete. We are left with a ghost on a page, a story whispered across generations from an Egyptian temple to an Athenian philosopher. Is it merely the most elaborate political allegory ever conceived, a cautionary tale of hubris from a master storyteller? Or is it something more? A faint signal, an echo of a genuine memory, a report from a world submerged not only by the ocean, but by the relentless and unforgiving tide of time itself. The land itself was a testament to a near-divine providence. From the heart of the central island flowed springs of both cold and hot water, a natural luxury that served the gardens and the baths of a sophisticated populace. The soil was impossibly fertile, yielding a bounty that could sustain a vast civilization twice a year. And across these verdant plains roamed great multitudes of elephants, the largest and most noble of beasts. But the island's true wealth lay buried beneath the soil. A metal, which Plato calls orichalcum, was mined in abundance. Second only to gold in value, it was said to possess a fiery, scintillating brilliance, a substance now lost to time and memory, but once the very symbol of Atlantean power. Yet this vibrant world, teeming with life and wealth, was destined for a violent end. On this point, Plato is unequivocal. In the fullness of time, he writes, there came terrible earthquakes and floods, and in a single dreadful day and one night of misfortune, the island of Atlantis disappeared, swallowed by the depths of the sea. In its place, he wrote, remained an impassable shoal of mud, a treacherous mire that obstructed all navigation, a permanent scar upon the ocean where a continent once stood. And here we arrive at the great stumbling block, the single detail that, for millennia, has relegated this entire account to the realm of fiction. The date. The Egyptian priests, the keepers of ancient law, had told the Athenian lawgiver Solon that the cataclysm occurred 9,000 years before his time. Solon lived around 600 years before the Common Era. This places the destruction of Atlantis at approximately 9,600 BC. By our modern calendar, that is 11,600 years ago. For centuries, that date was the final word, the definitive proof of a fabrication. 11,600 years ago. It was the Paleolithic era. Humanity, as the accepted story was told, lived in caves, small bands of hunter-gatherers armed with stone and bone. There was no metallurgy. There were no organized armies. There was no grand engineering capable of carving a 9-kilometer canal or constructing a vast naval fleet. Civilization, according to the orthodox timeline, would not blossom for another 6,000 years in the fertile crescent of Sumer. Atlantis, therefore, could only be a myth. Plato, it was decided, had invented it all, a cautionary tale, an allegorical story of a perfect state brought low by hubris, punished for its pride. His date was absurd, his geography impossible, his history a fable. The file is closed. The case is dismissed. Mainstream science has its explanation. Geologists account for the geology. Historians account for the myth. Two separate inquiries with no intersection. Until the dawn of the new millennium. Until the arrival.
Wait, this is not the full story. The most important part is just beginning, and it changes everything we thought we knew.
Of Google Earth. The sudden availability of high-definition public access satellite imagery was a revolution. It democratized discovery. It took the tools of exploration from the cloistered halls of academia, from institutions with exclusive access to expensive equipment, and placed them into the hands of anyone with an internet connection. And so, people began to look. They began to zoom. They began to measure. A new breed of researcher, dismissively labeled armchair archaeologists by the establishment, did what few had done before. They did not simply glance at a peculiar feature in the Sahara. They opened Plato's dialogues in one hand, and with the other, they wielded the digital ruler of a new age. They began to cross-reference, to compare the ancient text with the modern image. And it is here that the investigation takes a quantum leap. It is here that the hairs on the back of the neck begin to stand up. Let us return to the second piece of evidence, the structure. Plato described a city with a diameter of 127 stadia. What was once dismissed as a philosopher's dream could now be measured against the topographical reality of our own planet, pixel by pixel. The map of the ancient world, once thought complete, may have entire continents of knowledge waiting just beyond the horizon of our accepted truths. The past is never truly buried. Sometimes it is merely waiting for the right eyes and the right tools to find it. The measurements of the outer ring yield an average diameter of 23.5 kilometers, 127 Attic stadia, the unit of measure from Plato's era, converts to 23.49 kilometers. The proximity is disquieting. A skeptic will rightly intervene. This is a coincidence, they will claim, a case of forcing the numbers to fit a narrative. The ancient world, they will argue, knew many different measures of a stadion. The point is well taken. Let us then, for a moment, abandon the tyranny of absolute numbers and turn instead to the language of form, of proportion. Plato describes a central island, 5 stadia across. This is encircled by a ring of water, then a ring of land, 2 stadia in width. Beyond this, another ring of water, and a final, wider ring of land, 3 stadia across. He is explicit. The rings are not of uniform width. Now, cast your eyes upon the satellite imagery of the Rishat structure. At its heart, a central island of ancient sedimentary rock. Encircling it, a circular valley scoured out by millennia of erosion, the first ring of water. Then rises the first distinct, elevated ring of quartzite rock. Beyond it, another circular depression, the second ring of water. And finally, the second, broader quartzite ring, the third ring of land. The outer geological ring is demonstrably wider than the inner. The structural blueprint is identical. The proportions Plato described are preserved in the very rock of the earth. But what of the canal to the sea? Here, the theory seems to founder on the hard shores of reality. The Rishat structure lies dormant, landlocked, more than 400 kilometers from the Atlantic coast. What canal could possibly span such a distance? Yet when we peel back the layers of sand with technologies Plato could never have imagined,
Stay with me, because what comes next has been hidden for a very long time, and only a few people know the truth behind it.
startling truth emerges. Digital topography, specifically radar imaging beneath, and what it reveals is astonishing. Extending directly from the southern portion of the rings, precisely where Plato placed the Great Canal, a clear, undeniable trace of an ancient riverbed snakes its way south, a ghostly channel aimed toward the ocean. Water once flowed from this structure. It flowed south, toward a coastline that was, in that distant epoch, in a very different place. Furthermore, detailed geological surveys of the Rishat confirm the presence of intense hydrothermal activity. The Earth here was once alive with geothermal energy. This means hot water, saturated with minerals, once burst forth onto the surface. And what did the philosopher describe? Springs of both cold and hot water gushing forth from the central island. Consider the geography. Plato's city was said to lie on a southern-facing plain, sheltered to the north by mountains. The Rishat structure is situated on the southern extremity of the Adrar Plateau. A vast south stretches what is now desert, but what geological core samples reveal was once a vast and level plain, the basin of a forgotten river system. The final piece of the puzzle may seem the most outlandish. Plato spoke of a land teeming with life, even elephants, in the heart of the modern, irrefutable scientific fact. The period known as the African Humid Period, or the Green Sahara, reached its peak between 11,000 and 5,000 years ago. The Sahara was not a desert, it was a verdant savanna, laced with rivers and lakes, including the one that flowed from the Rishat and filled with grasslands. Rock art, found etched across the region, provides a stunning bestiary of this lost world. Giraffes, crocodiles, and yes, herds of elephants. We look at the world as a fixed and permanent thing. A map of deserts and oceans we assume has always been. But the Earth is a restless scribe, constantly writing and rewriting its own surface. Perhaps the line between geology and mythology is more porous than we believe. Perhaps the greatest desert on Earth does not conceal a city of gold and bronze, but something far more profound. A memory, etched in stone, of a world that was, and a warning of how quickly the green and living Earth can be reclaimed by sand and silence. The rock art of the Sahara tells a story the modern desert denies. Etched into stone are visions of a lost world, a vibrant ecosystem teeming with life. Here we see the elegant forms of giraffes, the patient power of crocodiles, and the unmistakable silhouette of lions on the hunt. And yes, in great thundering herds, elephants. Every single one of these seemingly incredible claims, made by the philosopher Plato in his account of a great ancient civilization, was once used by historians as proof of a fiction. They were dismissed as the fanciful details of a myth. Yet today, each one is being systematically corroborated by the dispassionate evidence of modern science. Geography, geology, and paleoclimatology all point to a Sahara that was once green and fertile. But what of the central, intractable paradox? The one element that seems to shatter the entire edifice? The date, 11,600 years ago. This number has long been the final nail in the coffin for any serious consideration of the tale. It is an anchor that drags the entire narrative down into the realm of fantasy. At that time, we were still a scattered people of the cave, huddled in the shadow of retreating ice sheets. Or so the story goes. Let us for a moment focus on that date, 9,600 BC. It is not a random number plucked from the ether. It is, perhaps, the single most significant, most violent, and most cataclysmic moment in the modern history of the human species. This was no gentle transition out of an ice age. It was a period of unimaginable, inhuman chaos. An event known to geologists as the termination of the Younger Dryas. To understand, we must rewind the clock. Roughly 12,900 years ago, the Earth was calmly, gracefully emerging from the deep freeze of the last glacial maximum. The world was warming. The great ice sheets were in a slow, steady retreat. And then, for reasons still fiercely debated, the bottom fell out. The planet was plunged with shocking suddenness back into the abyss of a full-blown ice age. Temperatures in the northern hemisphere plummeted by as much as 10 to 15 degrees Celsius. In geological terms, it was the blink of an eye. This brutal 1,300-year winter is the Younger Dryas. And then, precisely 11,600 years ago, as suddenly as it began, it was over. But it did not end peacefully. It ended in a global convulsion. Ice cores drilled from the Greenland ice sheet reveal a climate shift of staggering violence. Temperatures there skyrocketed by 10 degrees Celsius in a span of time that may have been as short as a single decade. The gigantic ice sheets that still covered much of North America, the Laurentide, and northern Europe began to disintegrate with an almost incomprehensible, catastrophic speed. This collapse unleashed trillions of cubic meters of fresh, glacial meltwater into the world's oceans, an event scientists call Meltwater Pulse 1b. It triggered one of the most rapid sea level rise events in Earth's history. The oceans of the world surged upwards by tens of meters in an exceptionally short period. This was not the slow, incremental creep we witness today. This was the planet pulling the plug from a gargantuan bathtub, unleashing a deluge upon every coastline.
And now comes the part no one talks about. But this is where the real mystery begins.
On Earth. Now, let us assemble the fragments. Imagine a world 11,700 years ago, just before the fall. The Sahara is a verdant savanna. Human civilization, perhaps far more advanced than we have ever dared to imagine, thrives in these fertile lands. They build their towns and cities along vast river systems and on coastlines now buried beneath 120 meters of water. And perhaps one of these cultures, a seafaring people with a sophisticated understanding of engineering, finds it. The Eye of the Sahara, a unique, almost divine geological formation, a natural fortress of perfect concentric rings. They settle within it. They apply their skills, a prowess honed by millennia of managing the great rivers of their green world to improve upon nature's design. They dredge the wide valleys, transforming them into navigable circular canals. They carve out glow to the sea. Here was a civilization in a perfect home, in a perfect world. A world on the precipice of an apocalypse it could neither predict nor comprehend. A memory of a golden age, preserved not in stone, but in a single, improbable story. A story waiting, it seems, for the earth itself to finally bear witness. In the waning twilight of the last great ice age, a civilization carves its destiny from the earth. With the world's oceans held captive in continent-spanning glaciers, the sea level is dramatically lower. The coastline of West Africa lies much farther to the west, a distant shore across a vast and fertile plain. Here they excavate, deepening a natural riverbed, forging a channel to the sea, a 9-kilometer artery connecting their heartland to the world. Upon a series of concentric rings, a feature of almost impossible geological perfection, they build their capital, and they flourish. This is a land of impossible bounty, a paradise nestled between protective mountains and a verdant savanna. They have an abundance of fresh water from rivers and the rare luxury of both hot and cold springs. Herds of elephants traverse the plains. Their society is complex, their trade routes extensive, their prosperity the envy of a nascent world. Then comes the year 9600 before the Common Era. The world changes. The Younger Dryas, a final frigid spasm of the Ice Age, comes to an abrupt end. A planetary fever takes hold. The great ice sheets of the north begin to collapse, releasing unfathomable volumes of fresh water into the oceans. This is not a gentle rising of the tide. It is a cataclysm. The sudden, massive influx of cold, fresh water disrupts the delicate engine of global ocean currents, choking Tillenia. The tectonic plates of the northern hemisphere had been suppressed under the weight of trillions of tons of ice. As that weight vanishes in a geological instant, the crust begins to rebound. This process, known as isostatic rebound, is not a gentle lift. It is a shuddering, violent adjustment. As Plato chronicled,
Stay with me, because what comes next has been hidden for a very long time.
Terrible earthquakes and floods racked the globe. And from the Atlantic abyss, this tectonic convulsion gives birth to a monster. A mega-tsunami, a wave whose height is measured not in tens, but in hundreds of meters, is unleashed. It is a liquid mountain, moving at the speed of a jet aircraft, a wall of raw oceanic power. It thunders eastward, an unstoppable force of annihilation. It strikes the West African coast, not as a breaking wave, but as a rapid, terrifying surge of the sea itself. It pours into the vast coastal plain, swallowing it whole. The 9-kilometer canal, the civilization's proud artery to the world, becomes its conduit of doom, funneling the deluge inland with unimaginable force. The wave crashes over the city, over its concentric rings of land and water, and obliterates a millennium of progress in a single moment. As Plato wrote, "In one dreadful day and one dreadful night, the island of Atlantis disappeared, having been swallowed up by the sea." But this was no cinematic sinking into a placid ocean. It was an act of violent burial. A tsunami is
Stay with me, because what comes next has been hidden for a very long time, and only a few people know the truth behind it.
Not clean water, it is a churning slurry of the seabed, carrying trillions of tons of sediment, silt, mud, and sand. When the waters finally receded, they left behind exactly what Plato described: an impassable shoal of mud, a thick, suffocating blanket covering everything. The city was gone. The civilization was extinguished. But the catastrophe was not over. A second, slower apocalypse began. The disruption of the ocean currents had permanently altered the climate. The atmospheric rivers that carried life-giving rain to North Africa were severed. The rains stopped. Slowly, inexorably, over the next several thousand years, the green Sahara began to die. Rivers dwindled to whispers and then vanished. Great lakes evaporated into mirages of salt and dust. The bountiful savanna withered, transforming into the largest and most hostile hot desert on the planet. The thick layer of mud that entombed the lost city dried, cracked, and was scoured away by the relentless wind. The ruins themselves, the stones, the foundations, were gradually buried by the encroaching sands of the new desert. Yet the foundational structure, the great concentric rings of the earth itself, was too immense to be erased. It remained, a ghostly fingerprint on the land, a tombstone the size of a city, slowly weathering over the next 11,000 years. It waited, silent and exposed, until the descendants of the catastrophe's survivors finally climbed into the heavens and looked down, unable to comprehend the magnificent scar they were seeing. So, does this mean the geologists are wrong? Is their elegant theory of a domed anticline, shaped by hundreds of millions of years of differential erosion, a lie? No. And herein lies the profound beauty of the hypothesis. The geologists are almost certainly 100% correct. The Rishat structure is a natural formation, an ancient wonder of the Earth. The theory is not that a lost civilization built the Eye of the Sahara. The theory is that they found it. They discovered this incredible, perfectly formed, divinely proportioned landscape and recognized it for what it was: a place to call home, a foundation upon which to build a world. Perhaps the greatest civilizations do not impose their will upon the landscape, but find their place within a grandeur that was there long before them. A story written not in books, but in the very stone of the planet itself. There exists a place on this planet so unique it appears divine. A natural fortress of concentric rings etched into the Earth's crust, as if by a compass of the gods. It is here, some believe, that a civilization of unparalleled ingenuity looked upon the landscape and declared, "Here we will build our capital." This idea attempts to reconcile two seemingly incompatible histories. It accepts the scientific consensus that this is an ancient geological structure, a magnificent accident of nature. But it also accepts Plato's description of Atlantis not as allegory, but as a literal account. The Atlanteans, in this telling, did not raise 40-kilometer mountains from the plains. They were not gods, they were human. They were master engineers. They settled a natural formation that perfectly matched their needs, a pre-made citadel awaiting its king. They fortified it, dredged its moats into grand canals, and spanned them with bridges and buildings of breathtaking scale. And this, perhaps, is the very reason we see no ruins. When you gaze upon the satellite image, you are seeing geology. You are not seeing bricks and columns. Those have long since been surrendered to the dust, scoured away by 11,000 years of relentless erosion in one of the harshest environments on Earth. The Saharan wind is a perpetual sandblaster, a tireless artist that grinds stone back into sand. Or has it? Within the inner rings of the Rishat structure, archaeologists have found tools, a multitude of tools. They are, for the most part, artifacts of the Acheulean culture, primitive stone hand axes, hundreds of thousands of years old. This proves that ancient hominids, perhaps Homo erectus, were here. They were drawn to this place for reasons we can only guess. But it does not, however, prove the existence of Atlantis. The confounding truth, the central mystery, is that the Rishat structure has never been the subject of a dedicated, large-scale archaeological excavation in search of a Bronze or Stone Age city. Geologists have walked its rings, charting its mineralogy and its origins. But archaeologists, armed with the specific mandate to find a lost civilization, have not. It is a remote, brutally inaccessible, and politically volatile region. No one has ever taken a spade to the soil of the central island with the express purpose of finding the foundations of a palace. No one has drilled core samples from the dry, circular depressions where water once flowed, searching for the remnants of ancient harbors or the ghosts of sunken ships. We are, quite literally, sitting and staring at a location that matches Plato's description to the meter, that aligns with the date of its demise to the day, that corresponds to the very species of its described ecosystem. And yet, no one is digging. Of course, there are challenges, powerful counter-arguments that it would be dishonest to ignore. Chief among them is the question of altitude. The Rishat structure today sits approximately 400 meters above sea level. How could it have been a port city, welcoming ships from a distant ocean? The answer may lie within the very cataclysm that destroyed it. Isostatic rebound is no mere theory. When trillions of tons of ice from the last glacial maximum melted, the land beneath them, relieved of an immense burden, began to rise. But the Earth's crust is a single, interconnected skin. A rise in one place can trigger subsidence or uplift in another. Add to this the constant, inexorable pressure of the African plate driving into the Eurasian plate, the very force that created the Atlas Mountains to the north. This entire region exists in a state of tectonic tension, a slow-motion geological heartbeat. 11,000 years is a whisper in geological time, but it is more than enough to hoist a coastal plain hundreds of meters into the sky. We have seen it before. The great ancient port of Ephesus, once a bustling hub of maritime trade, now sits 5 kilometers from the sea, a silent testament to the land's ceaseless ambition to rise. The evidence for what was, and what might have been, lies sleeping beneath the sand. It waits not for a hero or a myth, but simply for the curious hand of science. It begs the question of whether the greatest mysteries are hidden from us by the Earth or by our own reluctance to look. There is the question of a more extreme example, the riddle of orichalcum. What was it within the Rishat structure proven hydrothermal activity has for ages pushed a concentrate of minerals to the surface? The deep plumbing of the Earth, a network of hydrothermal vents, once bled riches onto these ancient lands. These could have been nuggets of native copper, which in that distant epoch were valued as highly as gold. It could have been electrum, the naturally occurring alloy of gold and silver, whose pale gleam would have seemed otherworldly. Or it might have been a unique form of brass, an alloy whose secret of smelting was known only to the civilization that thrived here, a testament to a lost metallurgy. The geological prerequisites for a strange and wondrous metal are undeniably present. And this leads to the central, unavoidable question, the question of coincidence. Can all of this truly be dismissed as mere coincidence? The official narrative of science insists that it is. A chain of incredible, mind-altering, statistically impossible coincidences. A coincidence that Plato described a capital city built of concentric rings of land and water, and the reshat structure is a formation of perfect
Most people stop watching right here. But if you continue, you'll discover something almost no one knows. This is where things get really interesting. What you're about to hear might explain why this was never meant to be discovered.
Could have been electrum, the naturally occurring alloy of gold and silver, whose pale gleam would have seemed otherworldly. Or it might have been a unique form of brass, an alloy whose secret of smelting was known only to the civilization that thrived here, a testament to a lost metallurgy. The geological prerequisites for a strange and wondrous metal are undeniably present. And this leads to the central, unavoidable question, the question of coincidence. Can all of this truly be dismissed as mere coincidence? The official narrative of science insists that it is. A chain of incredible, mind-altering, statistically impossible coincidences. A coincidence that Plato described a capital city built of concentric rings of land and water, and the reshat structure is a formation of perfect concentric rings. A coincidence that Plato specified a diameter for this city of 127 stadia, translating to 23.5 kilometers, and the outer ring of the reshat structure measures precisely 23.5 kilometers. A coincidence that Plato detailed rings of varying widths, and the rings of the reshat conform to those same ancient proportions. At a certain point in any investigation, the sheer volume of coincidence becomes so overwhelming that the single, simple hypothesis that Plato was, in essence, telling the truth, emerges as a more logical and parsimonious explanation than an infinite, branching chain of random chance. We do not assert that this was Atlantis. We are investigators. We are simply laying the evidence upon the table, and the evidence is irrefutable. It demands an explanation. The convenient story that this was all just a myth, an allegory, no longer holds. The data from orbital satellites, the geological core samples, the silent testimony of Greenland's ice layers, they all scream of a global cataclysm that aligns with the timeline Plato gave. They suggest that this text, which we have for centuries dismissed as philosophy, may be the single most important historical document we possess. A memory, distorted certainly, passed down through generations undoubtedly, but an essentially true memory of a real civilization, a real place, and a real catastrophe. Perhaps Atlantis was not a myth of a sunken continent powered by magical crystals. Perhaps it was the real, tragic story of a Bronze Age civilization that reached the zenith of its development, only to be erased from the face of the earth in a single, terrible night. And its tombstone, the Eye of the Sahara, has been staring back at us this entire time, waiting. waiting for us to rediscover the art of flight so that we might finally see it for what it is. The question that remains is a simple one. If we missed this, something so vast it is visible from space, something that aligns so perfectly with our most enduring myth of a lost world, then what else are we missing? What other truths, hidden in plain sight, are waiting for their moment of discovery? And as we stand on the precipice of this ancient, silent ruin, we must ask, what else have we failed to see? In the relentless current of unfolding events, the next chapter is perpetually reads of the story as lost to the tide. One must remain ever present, ever watchful.